So before we let in the waiting room, you'll just have to hit that continue button. It'll either say continue or got it. And then Eleanor, if you can do backup recording. All security settings are on and we're recording, so we're good. And Carolyn, you can take it from here.
Okay, great. All right, are we gonna, yeah, everybody's ready to go? We'll admit the room. Cool. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 523rd New Social Environment Talk. I'm Carolyn, the Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Matvey Levenstein, Taras Levitsky, hosted by Lisa Yuskavage and Phong Bui. We are thrilled to welcome poet Neeli Cherkovski here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat in a moment for a living document of resources and actions. And now, to very briefly introduce today's guests and hosts. Born in 1960 in Moscow, Matvey Levenstein's delicate and exquisitely rendered paintings explore themes of history and representation. Taras Levitsky is an artistic director of Philadelphia's Voloshky Ukrainian Dance Ensemble and oversees performances that combine Ukrainian and American dance aesthetics. Lisa Yuskavage's highly original approach to figurative painting has challenged conventional understandings of the genre. And Phong H. Bui is publisher and artistic director of our Brooklyn Rail, the River Rail, Rail Editions, and Rail curatorial projects. Please check the chat in a moment for much more extensive bios. And with that, I'll turn it over to Phong.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful to my two old friends, painter extraordinaire, as you mentioned, Lisa and Matvey, who have brought up this urgent idea of how artists can be served as a canaries in the coal mines, as signifier of ominous occurrences or any kind of danger really that are about to take place. I'm equally grateful to them for having introduced me to my new friend, our new friend, Taras, who in some ways is our guest of honor, along with Matvey, who happened to be married to my co-host, Lisa. So that's terrific. I like to, begin just before we ask the question, just a little bit in a very briefly haiku manner to share my own perspective as why we came together. Having grown up in the tiny country in Vietnam, I learned what it meant to be a soccer field for bigger nations, including the very big ones in the East like China, Mongolia, Japan, and the one in the West too, like France and then US. It never ends. And why the moment it feels exactly what's going on with Ukraine being smaller than the bigger neighbor, Russia. But the topics of our discussion today is how we can look at the art and culture as a subversive agency, arsenal, or counter friction against any form of social and political oppressions, especially when they exploit under the banner of religious justification of, say, sexual politics. And the two are usually go hand in hand as means of anti-Semitism, homophobia, among other rhetorical devices that justify the rise of Putin and Russia Christian nationalism. I remember talking to Matvey years ago, not long ago actually, right after Trump election, when Timothy Snyder, great book came out, super small. I think he might have written it in 2 months, on tyranny, lessons from 20th century. That was 2017. And it will urgently reminded us in a way how imminent threats to democracy did not end or haven't ended with the defeat of Hitler or the collapse of communism. Just like Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Joseph Stalin, among other dictators, any tyrant really, or would-be tyrant, will propose an identical goal, namely that mythical era of past national greatness can be easily revived. And that he can achieve it himself, you know? So it's very important that we be constantly reminded, you know, the kind of rhetoric, lies and distortion, along with ridicule, intimidation, even force against his opponent, the tyrant, you all, tighten his grip on the country. And finally, any kind of disaster or emergency that might occur, be it domestic economy, which in the case is a national pride in a way, that has undermined in either way, doesn't matter. It's simply provide him the excuse. He needs to take total control of the nation and eradicate personal liberties. So the book was written in response to Trump election, as mentioned. Forewarning such danger is real even today's America. Given then President use of lie, denunciation, and threat behaviors that resemble those used by Hitler, and more recently by Putin, Matvey and I also talk about when Snyder's other book came out, The Road to Unfreedom, when came out a year later, you know? So how the two Russian fascist thinkers, particularly we talk about Alexander Dugin and Alexander Prokhorov, who prompted Putin to view an independent Ukraine as an existential threat to Russia. Given just that last month, in late February, when Putin has stated he wanted to denazify Ukraine, a vile and outrageous statement, really, especially given that President Zelensky being a Jewish person. We should remember that during World War II, Ukraine was a major area of fighting, death, and genocide. 2.5 million soldiers were killed there between 1941, I wrote down here, 1944. Just that alone, 4.5 million civilians were killed in that same time frame. 7 million deaths constituted almost 11% of that country pre-war population, a figure exceeded only by Poland's loss of 19.6% of its population during World War II. Ukraine has come to be known as the site of Holocaust by bullets, where Nazi Ensemble killing squad shot dead many Jews that they could find. The site of Babizar, outside of Ukraine capital, Kiev, epitomized the fervor of Nazi killing. We should be reminded constantly that between September 29, 30th, 1941, Nazi soldiers murdered 700 plus Jews in the largest two-day massacre ever in a single site in the entire war. The site should be used throughout Nazi occupation Ukraine, and the total more than 100,000 people would be murdered there too. We should be reminded after the war, Soviet Union immediately and consistently refused to recognize the Nazi crime against Soviet Jews. Stalin anti-Semitism were extended by successive leaders who refused to allow a memorial at the site until 1976. And even then, the memorial was dedicated only to Soviet citizens shot at Babizar. There were no recognition of the murder of Soviet Jews. The Soviet Union itself collapsed in 1991, and it would take another 25 years until 2016 before Ukraine itself allowed the establishment of memorials specifically to commemorate onslaught against the death of Jewish victims. These are just something that we have to keep in mind. So I can go on, and I will, I'm sure Matvey will join me on this, Taras too, and Lisa. But now I'd like to turn the mic to Lisa for her remarks. Lisa?
Well, I am probably everyone's wondering, what do I have to say? Because I am not a dissident. I am not from a communist country. I'm just a person who happens to know Taras from Tyler School of Art. We met on the first day of school, art school in 1980, I believe it was, and became friends. There's a large Ukrainian refugee population at Tyler, and Taras and I were both commuters, meaning we were, not exactly poor kids, but we weren't lucky enough to live in the dorms. In some ways, we were just drawn to each other from certain kinds of understandings of different kinds of struggles. I suppose my last name betrays a background from the that part of the world. At any rate, 4 years later, I met this man who is a Russian Jew, and his refugee status, also a political refugee. I brought them together because everywhere ever since this war began, people kept calling me and asking me, what does Matvey feel? What does Matvey think? How is Matvey feeling? What's going on? And I felt that perhaps for Matvey being an artist, and I, because being artists, we're alone all the time, it would be helpful to hear from Matvey. And furthermore, because the world that I know doesn't know Taras, and that I knew Taras, and Matvey and Taras I do have introduced to each other over the past several years. They've had many conversations and share a point of view. Matvey's father, who is turning 100 this July, and was a tortured by Stalin and was in the camps, and is actually going to ask some questions and speak later if we will allow him some time, which I hope we do. He has a lot to say. He was born in the Ukraine. So there are people who I think can actually be conduits to, and I'm really just here to sort of put the salad together in a sense and sort of put people together, and ask you, who also are a political refugee, who I thought would be sensitive. So anyway, I really just I called Taras and asked him if he would speak to the rail community. And because I have the position where Matvey reads constantly and shares with me constantly. So I know how Matvey feels, but I thought it would be interesting. And I spoke to Taras and have spoken to Taras when he was making a film. And I would like to turn it now and discuss with Taras if he would feel comfortable. Taras, can you say hello? Because I don't see you on my screen.
I'm here.
Yep.
Waving my hands.
Hi. Why don't you talk about yourself and your background and your experience in making your film and working with Mark Morris, and your experiences, and just who you are in all of this, and your Ukrainian experience, and why you matter in all of this.
Well, it's up to you to decide whether I matter, I guess. but I'll start with I guess the background, and I'll try to speak quickly because I really would want to.
And you have a little bit of film, and I thought it would be kind of interesting for people to see this project that you've done and some of the things you've done.
I do. It's a project that kind of explains how I've gotten immersed into Ukrainian culture, but by accident. Not by accident, I am Ukrainian, but I'm part of the DP generation, the displaced persons generation. My parents were, like Matvey's, considered intelligentsia in Ukraine. And that was frowned upon if you were not towing the line with the Bolsheviks. My father's father was shot in front of him and put into a mass grave. My father spent time in concentration camps. So it's that kind of a story where when you have your rug pulled out from under you, you end up in the United States. I met Lisa, like she said, at Tyler School of Art. I do have to say that we clicked from the beginning, because we we tend to love history and base everything on kind of a historic methodology. But it's funny, actually, I wasn't going to tell this story, but since you introduced the rail community and you said Black Lives Matter, and then the Lenape tribe of indigenous people. And this conversation is about indigenous people of Ukraine. And I'd like to say another story because yesterday I was having rehearsal with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and we are doing a rendition of We Shall Overcome there with a performance. And they were very uncomfortable. They said, do you feel comfortable taking that? I said, why not? Well, it kind of belongs to the Black community. I said, no, it belongs to anybody, I think, that feels like they will overcome injustice. And they said, well, it's kind of like, yes, it's a folk song like that, but are you comfortable? And I told them this story, and this is how this got into the repertoire, both times, actually, when we did the Mark Morris piece also. And that was that growing up, I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in the 1960s. We moved out after a while. I loved that neighborhood. We moved out to a predominantly white neighborhood. It was 1968 when desegregation started. And when the busloads of people from my old neighborhood were coming in, I was overjoyed. And instead, I saw these parents throwing tomatoes, yelling, screaming that these people should not be in our schools. And I went back to my father and I said, what's going on here? I just don't get it. And I remember these words exactly. Well, they weren't exactly because they were in Ukrainian, but he said, look, we don't subscribe to this. You stay friends with the people that you grew up with, because their lives matter also. They want good schooling. Their lives matter. And from then on, well, I took the shit side of that, because yes, there were knives and riots and all of that. And somehow, because this was on the heels of McCarthyism, I was either deemed a communist or, a sympathizer with the Blacks. And so it was a tough time growing up. So that song, and we used to my father would take me in that neighborhood to the Baptist church. We would hear the singing there. This stuff is beautiful. It's human. And so this, I feel very at home with this community since Caroline's first introduction of that. So that's it. The project that we worked on was a project with Mark Morris. It has to do with how I got there. I don't know who's familiar with Mark Morris's work, but he loves folk art. Mm-hmm. And he loves folk dancing. He loves natural dancing. And he almost sometimes laughs at people say, where do you come up with this stuff? And he tells them, I don't come up with this stuff. It's human. It's normal. I just bring this beauty out. I want to present the kind of dancing, how people move before choreographers screw them up, and so it's a very natural form. I always loved his work. The deeper I went into looking into indigenous Ukrainian work, the more I fell in love with his work. And we put the two together. And even interestingly enough, Misha Baryshnikov came by and loved the project also, and was just hanging out, sitting on the floor for about a month and a half when we were working on this.
Do you want to show something?
I'll show a video of what ended up being. This project was being done during the Yanukovych years. Yanukovych was bringing the country back towards the Soviet Union, and peaceful protesters were protesting because human rights were being taken away. LGBTQ rights were being taken away. It was going in the other direction. Meanwhile, I'm pulling a group out to work with Mark Morris in Brooklyn, and they ended up sending a minder with us. The minder is like this, those of you that were ever in Soviet times, those are the people that come to watch you, that the government sends with you. Mm-hmm. And I realized that they sent this person along, and they would have these secret, I'm giving you the backstory of what you won't see in the clips here, is is they would have these indoctrination sessions, and I would overhear them. And they would say things like, you know, you're going to go back to Ukraine. There is no democracy in Ukraine. There is no Taras Levitsky in Ukraine. You will have to deal with me. We never had democracy. We never will. And we have no need for it. We have the way that we work. And that's when I realized shit's going to go down. And this was 8 months before the shooting started in Ukraine, where peaceful protesters were shot. So the clip now that you'll see is a trailer for something that we shelved in 2014 because my producer Henry Nevison said this stuff's not over, and so now we've just pulled it back out because we knew this was coming. We saw it coming, and we're continuing the project. But this is a trailer as it was done until then. What you'll see there is clips that we took. You'll see the difference in the quality of the clips because the professional camera footage was what we shot prior to the riots. The other things were things that my friends and I shot with cell phones when the shootings broke out. And we compiled all of that to just produce a trailer of a project that is in post-production right now. And we have camera people working in Ukraine right now, still shooting all of this. So you can start that. It starts with, I think, a poem.
Automatically gonna go
Yeah.
there.
And Taras, the idea for the canary in the coal mine that we were talking about,
The canary in the coal mine, I'll tell you, is that's somebody said, how did you see this coming? And I said, it's just, you know it, because if you follow history, it just follows certain things. And I think Phong mentioned that, is that you see this stuff coming. Lisa, in last conversation we had, when you drill down deep as artists, if we drill down deep enough, you know what's going to happen. It's just natural. So oftentimes I tell artists that really your goal is not to be doing the painting after the fact. Your goal is to see what should be out there in order to maybe steer us away from something that we see as inevitable. And so I'd rather be the canary in the coal mine rather than, as an artist, rather than, I think I said, the string quartet playing on the Titanic at the end as it's going down. So that's kind of the idea.
But doesn't the canary actually croak in the coal mine? Isn't that why they send them in?
Yep. Yes, and that leads me to a second thing.
Yeah.
That as artists, and I'll say this definitely as a word of warning, that we tend to be very feeling people. And I have to say that, and maybe you can hear it in my voice, but it changed me and I needed help to get out of a depressed state after I saw how fast things turn. And it took me a long time even to reach out to Lisa. And I say, yeah, I did it. No, she was calling me all the time. I just couldn't call back. I couldn't talk to anybody probably for, I don't know how long it was.
Well, let's play this for people.
Go ahead.
These stairs.
Yeah, that's not a good place to stop.
No, I'm sorry. I think it just froze when
Ukraine is now at a crossroads or tipping point in its democracy. Even after over 20 years of independence, is still trying to find its identity. We saw what was happening in Ukraine. It was sliding backwards as a free country, and it was beginning to create a wall. A wall that we worked long and hard for 70 years to break down. I knew this going into the project. We were very nervous when we first went to Ukraine to actually work. This had nothing to do with politics. It had to do with getting to know one another and create something beautiful together and to respect Ukrainian culture. My name is Taras Levitsky. I'm the artistic director of the Voloshky Ukrainian Dance Company in Philadelphia. Voloshky was founded 40 years ago, really to preserve our culture through dance. At that time,
I just don't want to spend too much. I want to talk to people, not just show this. There you go.
Choreographer today.
I was a folk dancer before I did anything else. It's the ethos of folk dancing that is maintained in my own choreography now, so that I use line dances and circle dances and people holding hands and looking at each other. The thing that's interesting about choreographing for anybody besides my company is that they're good. I only work with people who are good.
5, 6, 7, and a 1, 2, 3, hit, 2, 2. We were very excited to work with somebody as legendary as Mark Morris. And what Mark very quickly realized after, I think, the second day is that this would be a wonderful experience for his dancers as well. And so for the next 3 weeks, we gave master classes to one another. 5, 6, 7, 8, look! 2, 1, and 1, 2. Yeah? Yeah. With music.
I think you can go to the next time cue like this.
Down.
So this was here in Brooklyn. There in Brooklyn. I'm in Philadelphia now.
And to be able to take a lot of
Shit.
So I'm not making up a Ukrainian dance. I'm not Ukrainian. I have no clue what that would be. There's no way for me to know what I'm going to do. Right. Oh! Surprise me! I have a fabulous, interesting, strange life. So I get to make it up as I go along.
Flying. Let her go. Watch her.
The second phase of the work was working with the musicians. We brought in some of the best musicians from Ukraine, from the Kirovohrad Philharmonic, to join us and work with Mark. And that was no less intense than working with the dancers.
Right. Can we have more of the grace right here?
The musicians themselves said that they've never seen a choreographer take apart music in every detail and pull out nuances.
Separate.
The only reason that I choreograph is because of music. I very rarely use music that's written to be danced to because it's very often terrible, with the exceptions of maybe Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky. So in the sort of the classical Western canon of music, there's a great deal of fabulous music that is meant to be danced to by me.
Like Ukraine is free, it's the time has passed that we need
I think
to
you can
always
go to
be
the next
archiving
timestamp.
all
Unless
this.
you want to watch.
I'll move.
Do we have choreographers out there?
Mhm.
I spoke to him this morning. He's still alive. This is the minder that they sent with us.
We walk hand in hand. We walk hand in hand someday. Darling, here in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
So, so in 2014, this all happened. Sorry, I forgot when this ends. I haven't seen this since 2014, to be honest. But as you can see, this war has been going on from 2014. All of that footage was from 2014 when the first protesters were being shot. This weekend, we're putting together a show with the Philadelphia Orchestra. We're putting on a melody by Miroslav Skorik, which was written and is almost a spiritual hymn. We might be able to show that later. I don't know if you want to see it now, but it was used by President Zelensky when he addressed Congress, and it was a very effective piece. It's another way that music can be told. It tells a story of Ukrainian people. Unfortunately, I know I get asked this question a lot. What happened to those dancers? I know that some were killed in the protest. The males are all serving, and I know we lost more already in this war of those dancers that took part in that project in 2014. So that I think that's it for that video. Oh, Lisa, you're muted.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It was very moving. And in some ways, you know, it doesn't surprise me at all how you and Mark would get along, because we interviewed him early on, might have been in 2003. He grew up in Seattle, Washington, not just because of family who have immense appreciation for music and dance, because both of his parents were very much involved in flamenco and ballet. And I know that in his neighborhood growing up too, according to, I remember the interview, also growing up in the family predominantly on the neighborhood with Black and Asian family moving in. So he had that already exposure to diversity, you know, and he was very deeply interested in everything under the sun. So it's just ballet, flamenco, and other, you know, other kind of dance from different culture. So in a way, it makes sense that you two would come together in this regard.
It's the real beauty of being an American artist. It's what we can do here. Because we're sitting here, we can go down the street and get Chinese food, and we can go there and we can do that. And I can go to Mark Morris. It is the beauty of being American, and the beauty of pluralism.
The thing I'd like to give you a little bit of what I was trying to say before was to have an opportunity for people to hear you and Matvey also dialogue, because that's one of my favorite things, to hear you two talk about, to kick things around and to open it up, because I think maybe some people wanted to hear Matvey on his thoughts on his point of view on, this situation, right, Phong?
Yes, indeed.
And we'd love to hear from Victor, his dad, because again, those two, he's like my second father at this point. My father passed away two years ago, and
he's my father now, because my father passed away already. So we're counting on Victor to pipe in a little bit later. But Matvey, do you want to say some words about people keep asking me, how do you feel? So
yeah,
I know you often say it's very hard for you to express your feelings about stuff, but I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, in some ways, Taras and I had opposite fates, where you came to America as a very small child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then grew up here, but then started going back to Ukraine, and really had a lot of investment in it and investigation of it. And I actually grew up there. I was 19 when I left, and only went back once, and had this weird hesitation about going back.
Well, you couldn't.
Well, first I couldn't, and as
Right.
long as it was the Soviet Union. Then when I could, when Lisa and I got married, unfortunately, I dragged her there.
Our honeymoon was.
Yeah, I thought it was a trip, but
We had
a very unusual honeymoon, going throughout all post-revolutionary Eastern Europe, and then ending up with Moscow, meeting up with my two girlfriends there. So that was the entire situation was very interesting. But so in some ways it's and so weirdly, yeah, part of my hesitation about talking about it, I was saying, well, I'm so American now, and I lost contact with most people. And interestingly, we were walking around Tompkins Square Park, and Lisa asked me whether my dad and I were, would call Russia and see how they're doing, or what happened. And I said, I don't want to. Then I asked my dad, and he says, yeah, I don't want to either. And partly we're afraid to find out what they think. You kind of don't want to even go there. So anyway, so that's.
Well, you don't want to argue with people.
Well, you're just afraid. I mean, some will think like you, but a lot will not. And they're good people too, by the way. They're great people, some of them. Yeah, we started saying. So my father is from Ukraine, from the city of Mykolaiv in the southern Ukraine, which was under attack, and they actually pushed it back. My mother was from Belarus. They met in Moscow, and I was born there, and that was the Soviet Union back then. It was one country. We came to the U.S. as political refugees in 1980. My entire family, with the exception of my one of my grandmothers and my mother, were either in prisons or in the camps. My father, both of my grandfathers, and my grandmother. The grandfather that I'm named after died in the camp. The other grandfather was there twice. There is a famous Marx statement by Karl Marx that existence determines consciousness, right, Phong?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, social existence determines consciousness. In Russian, it sounds «бытие определяет сознание». There's a very close word to it, «бытие». «Бытие» is existence, «бытие» is beating. So everybody in Russia was saying that beatings determine consciousness. So So yeah, it's hard to look at any of this as not through the lens of the beatings that then determine consciousness. After the only time I was sort of not necessarily regretting leaving, but I felt if I hadn't left, I probably wouldn't now, was in 91, around the Russian coup, KGB coup against Gorbachev, and then when Yeltsin climbs on a tank, and then Rostropovich and musicians all show up at the Russian White House, and they're ready to die, and thank God it was relatively bloodless. 3 people died. One of them I actually went to architecture school with, apparently. He was older than me. But other than that, it was pretty bloodless. And I look in retrospect, I realized that this was Russian Maidan. And then what happened? I mean, when Putin became a leader, everybody in the Russian community was saying, well, that's not good. I mean, a KGB officer, they called him Chekist, which was predecessor of KGB. Chekist being in charge of a country cannot be possibly good. So obviously there's going to be a lot of, and there is a lot of talk about, to use that famous term, who lost Russia, right? Or I can paraphrase it, what the fuck is wrong with Russia? I don't know, can we say fuck on this program?
You just did twice.
Okay, yeah, that's we're good, right? All right, so what the fuck is wrong with Russia? You can sort of look at the whether there was Western responsibility for it. That could be an interesting question, but basically, I think the fault lies with the country and itself. And when Germany was defeated after World War II, and maybe that's the difference between hot war and cold war, Germans were really forced to investigate not just Hitler's period and the atrocity of that, but also what led up to it, the German traditions, the German history, the pursuit of German greatness. And I feel like Russians did not have to do it. They never investigated and interrogated their history, not just even the Soviet period, but also what preceded it and continuities. To give you one concrete example, after Solzhenitsyn's great archipelago, Gulag archipelago rather, there was only one properly scholarly history of the gulags and forced labor camps written anywhere. And that was by Anne Applebaum, an American who wrote that. And to me, that is such an incredible, shouldn't Russians have written this? So, and there were organizations dedicated to preserving the memory and the history of the repressions. Now they're all closed, but I do feel that they were not sort of their noses were not rubbed into it the way Germans had to deal with that. And Germany became a much better place for it.
You mean like reparations?
No, not reparations, just studying Holocaust in school as children, as sort of accepting the responsibility and not just pining about your lost greatness. And I think Putin capitalized on that. I can keep going on and on, but there's an interesting continuity between, the Soviet Union was, and communism created this fig leaf because Russians, of course, were the victims of it as well. And there was an international component to communism. According to conservative estimates, 100 million people around the world, non-combatants, were killed as a result of communist policies. And it's a pretty staggering amount. And then, like I said, that comes out of French sources, and I think they're being pretty conservative. The regime was pretty cannibalistic. It went after its own. True, but also there were, like I said, continuities from Russian imperialism directly then continuing into Soviet imperialism. And then, of course, the new Putin's imperialism. Russia under Nicholas I, and he himself was called the gendarme of Europe, the policeman of Europe. He was putting down all the liberal revolutions all over Europe, especially in Hungary of 1848, and collaborating with other reactionary monarchs. He also, of course, put down 2 Polish rebellions. And then it continued, of course, with the suppression of the first Ukrainian Republic by then already a Soviet regime, and then went on and on and on. And then, of course, East Berlin, Hungary in 56, Czechoslovakia of 68, and then, Ukraine again. So I don't know.
And this thing now about Ruski Mir, like this.
Right, yeah, Ruski Mir, the Russian world, which is like, can you imagine a German politician talking about the German world? By the way, they used to. So again, under Nicholas I, sorry to bring, Lisa calls me Mr. Historical Perspective, but this is kind of interesting. So it was, I think, Uvarov, his Minister of Education, that created this triad of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality as these pillars of Russian society. So the kind of nationalities, it was more like the national spirit, Russianness. And the orthodoxy is the Orthodox Church, and autocracy is absolute power of the Tsar. It is very interesting how Putin now collected those elements as well. So he both have the Communist Party behind him and the Russian Orthodox Church blessing the Russian arms. There's also very, very interesting, and this is Lisa coined this, and I think she's absolutely right, of homophobia as this organizing principle reactionary, and she said this is the new anti-Semitism, and I think this is very interesting. I think it was, I'm not sure who said that. I thought it was Lassalle, but maybe it's Bebel. One of those Marxists said that anti-Semitism is socialism of fools, meaning that it's the easiest principle to sort of organize people, but that otherwise would disagree. And so homophobia became this very interesting, one thing that you have to say about Putin, and that he's not, for a change, and rather unusually for a Russian leader, he's not an anti-Semite. That's kind of interesting, actually. A lot of his buddies, judo buddies and whatnot, cronies, and of course oligarchs, are actually Jewish. So I'm not saying that anti-Semitism doesn't exist there, but that's not what they're weaponizing now. But homophobia is, and you would say why homosexuals? They're such a tiny percentage of population, right? But then you also have to say, but why the Jews? They're also the tiny percentage of the population. So why would they loom so large? So they call it gay Europa.
Well, it's also the way that it has to do with freedom. It has to do with the West, and the reason why I'm so sensitive to it is that it comes back to the arts in a certain sense, like that, like the world that we live in, the world that we care about, and this sort of comes back to like the West, you know, and Kirill, that the bishop, the patriarch of
Russia, who is also a KGB agent in the past. Actually, the Russian Orthodox hierarchy was penetrated in the Soviet days by KGB and still is. So both Kirill and I think the previous patriarch were actually KGB.
But they want to see everything in the West destroyed, and the Russian world kind of the Soviet Union brought back.
Well, I think it's not even the Soviet Union. I think it's really Phong mentioned Dugin and this crazy, Eurasia, these crazy ideas that he sometimes collaborates with, sometimes distances himself from, but they're really in this mystical world, and in a kind of a religious world, and what the on Russian television was I think it was one of those like really awful people that spew propaganda. One of them said, and I think it was said several times, "What good is the world if Russia is not in it?"
Mm-hmm.
Very chilling.
It's very chilling. I mean, so it's a nuclear threat. It was actually, it's like, well, we can destroy America with nuclear. I mean, they have the most nuclear warheads than anybody else in the world.
And you
And
said
so
it's, you said they're not answering the phone when the
no, Americans are calling them. They're not answering the phone. So, but it's kind of like, if you really think about it, it's like, so they're throwing this children tantrum, like stomping their feet, like we are, like, you know, except that it's extremely chilling. I mean, it's the threat is yeah.
Matvey,
yes,
can I ask a question because you mentioned something about you sent an article of Nina Khrushcheva to read, and I told you how tortured it seems to be, and she seems to almost straddle that both sides of that Russian person trying to grapple with exactly what you said. We didn't have our noses rubbed in it. We didn't study it enough. We didn't really learn from our history. It's refreshing to hear when you say that, but somebody like Nina Khrushcheva writing this in the Atlantic, she writes immediately that, you know, we loved Ukraine, we did that, you know, and we did that, but then she goes, the very next paragraph, she says, but America just wanted to rub our noses in it, and we did this, and there's a certain hatred about that.
No, absolutely. I think America is, if you want to ask me about American responsibility, it was that they did not rub their noses enough.
And that's very,
there was a piece
you're saying the exact opposite.
If you remember in the 90s, that was, you know, Clinton 90s, everybody just moved on. They said, oh, great, we don't need to spend that much on the armaments. This is peace dividend. Let's just bring them into you know, the community of the nations. We're hoping the best for them. But yeah, everybody looked away.
And Ukraine was knocking on the door to get rid of this nuclear arsenal.
Yes.
And Condoleezza Rice of George Bush Sr. Said, you can easily just send it all to Moscow. And we said, we would rather actually have America come and dismantle it. And it went back and forth that you don't have an embassy in Kyiv yet, and you won't have one until you give your weapons to Moscow.
G.E. Swartz, are you Russian or something? You know a lot of, no?
Yes, I mean, it's one, okay, so one thing where, like, the missed opportunities maybe here, and I remember having this great unease in the 90s, and I was telling Lisa that, you know, this used to be such a threat, right? This used to be this enormous power, and all of a sudden it's just poof, it's gone, and nobody's discussing why or what happened. And this is not, I mean, they were a great country, they want to be a great country, they're going to come back. Russia was just utterly irrelevant in the 90s in anybody's, and you know, even recently Obama said, oh yeah, they're just a third-rate power. Well, they're just a regional power. So that is what really rubbed them the wrong way. I mean, I'm not, I mean, you deserve your greatness. You don't just automatically be, you know, but go ahead.
I know, I was thinking this because I'm on the middle of the second volume by Stephen Cockin. It's 9 pages biography, second volume on Joseph Stalin. It's called Waiting for Hitler.
Yeah.
It's so intense.
Great book.
I mean, he, to me, Cockin, who will be coming to our program, I love to talk to him about greater detail, but basically the first volume, it's called Paradoxes of Power. I read it every page so carefully. It's dating from 1878, the year that Stalin was born, till 1928. That's the year before collectivization took place, in 29 until 33. The second volume is so interesting, Matvey, because it retold the stories by so many people perspective on when Hitler rose to power in 33 in the summer. For example, take Karl Kraus, the great poet, Austrian, one of my favorite critics too. He said the secret of the demagogue is to make himself as stupid as his audience so they think they are as clever as he. So there's a certain inherent handbook that these people masterfully study very carefully. I got very upset when I talked to my Italian friends, Taras. I'm going to talk about intellectual here, poet, writer, philosopher. They don't know Benito Juarez was the name that Mussolini's parents given to him. They don't even know that is a non-Italian name. You know, they're not even aware that when he got kicked out by the Socialist Party member because he advocated for Italy to join the war, the first war, there he met the founder of futurist art, futurism, Filippo Monaretti. And what is futurist art? It's technology, speed, and violence. So I think what Lisa saying on earlier was definitely right. We all talk about this, you know, Matvey, Taras, is the artist the one who go first, the poets, the intellectual. And Matvey and I talk about this too. Remember the great poem by Mandelstam, it's called the Stalin Epigram?
Yes, what killed him. It actually killed him.
He was actually the canary in the coal mine, and he didn't come
That's
back.
right. He was the first to go.
You got to watch out for that metaphor.
Exactly. But you guys remember, you know, how the repressive measure that they have to go through, particularly with Boris Pasternak.
Pasternak said apparently about that poem that this is I cannot possibly whatever agree because this is just a suicide by a poem.
Exactly.
Like that.
It's 2:00, and I was wondering if you guys want to open it up to some people who are.
Can I just say one more thing?
I see my father-in-law there.
Yeah. Can I just say one more thing?
Of course.
Yeah. Just this has been of interest. I mean, we all know that Zelensky, besides being the sex symbol and the hero of everybody, but I was fascinated by him when
you're jealous.
I'm totally jealous because basically he's a Soviet Jew. He's 18 years younger than me, but basically I just happened to be in Moscow. He just happened to be.
You're better looking.
Well, I don't know, but anyway, but it is amazing to me. I sort of feel like I have my handle on what it means to be Jewish in that part of the world. And one thing, I never felt Russian until I came to America, and everybody else started saying to me, "But you're Russian." I said, "No, I'm a Jew," because it was stamped in my passport as my nationality. It wasn't even religion. And then they would say, "Yeah, but you're a Russian, right?" And I go, "Well, I guess if you say so." And then, of course, you're different than Americans. You become Russian. So I'm sure Zelensky originally did not necessarily feel Ukrainian. But it's an adopted, but now he is the face, the embodiment of Ukraine. And to me, this is an absolutely fascinating
Look, your
aspect of it.
Your father is smiling. Let's bring Victor Levenstein on.
This is a perfect time to bring
he was
him
born in 1922 in Nikolaev.
What's the question for him?
I don't know. You want to just get him.
Yeah, somebody ask him a question.
We'll get
Victor. I'll ask you, Pan Victor. Where are you?
Well, somebody has to unmute him. I think.
Unmute. Yes, I
Mr. Victor, I'd like for you to talk about the last thing that I read that your son shared with me about. I think it was you posted it on Facebook about feeling Ukrainian.
This thing, I was born, he just said about it. I was born in beautiful city of Nikolaev. It's the south and warm, and this is start of my life, the happiest years of my life, because all this arrested started when I was 15. My parents were arrested, and then I was also went to jail by KGB. But so the best part of my life was Ukrainian people, Ukrainian songs, and just people. I think that my son and you and Lisa talk enough about the historical reason of the tragedy, what happened. I would like to, because of my age, and because I was witness of one terrible crime against the Ukrainian people, and I don't think there are many live witnesses, because it happened 90 years ago, 91 years ago. But I witnessed it. We live in Kharkov at this time, my parents and I, and we live in big apartment building. And this apartment building was tiny 4-room lobby downstairs, and it was heated, so it was warm in the winter. And people who fleeing from Ukrainian villages when this whole terrible thing started, what we call Holodomor, death from hunger, organized by Soviet authorities, by Stalin, organized death by hunger. And I was 9 years old boy, and in the morning, I need to go to school. And in this lobby, there was terrible, frightening people who was in this, in rags, in homemade clothing. They just crawl in night. They crawl in this lobby because it was warm, and was dying there. I have to go in the morning to school, and at the time I was reading Gogol's story, which calls Terrible Revenge. And at the end of this story, one dead man is gnawing. Dead man is gnawing on one dead man. Terrible thing. And when I saw this scary dead people, dark from frostbite, swelling from hunger, lying down. In my mind, it seemed to me that I saw this dead people from the Gogol story, and it was feeding my childhood fears for many years. I still in my mind I remember this picture, these people lying, this terrible, scary dead people lying in the
lobby,
of our apartment. I think that
how many people died?
5 million.
How many people died of that in that the forced starvation?
Nobody knows exactly. Nobody knows exactly.
They say 5 to 6 million.
6
million people.
Between 5 and 6 million. Innocent, the best farmer, the best farmer in the Soviet Union.
And it's interesting because one of the things that when I met Taras, I actually and since Taras came to Philadelphia as a baby, he was always very fiercely Ukrainian. And this is sort of an interesting sort of understanding of the Ukrainian people that I always carried with me all my life from meeting him, but also before I met him, the high school I went to, the Philadelphia High School for Girls, had a Ukrainian club. And Taras's girlfriend was from this Ukrainian club from Philadelphia. And they were very fiercely Ukrainian. And most of these Ukrainian kids in Philadelphia were either born in America or came as babies, but they dressed in traditional Ukrainian clothing and spoke Ukrainian and were very fiercely guarding their Ukrainian culture and married each other. Taras, you're married to a Ukrainian. It's very important to preserve the language, to preserve, like you're an expert in traditional dance. It was important to you. I mean, you're preserving.
I actually met my wife dancing. Dance, though, is an art form that you don't need language for, and you don't need grammar.
But the point is that the Ukrainians are it's my takeaway, and I have nothing to do with this except to be an observer of you and Matvey, and the destruction over and over again of the Ukrainian people. They are tough. We already said fuckers, but it's like the toughest people I have ever met outside of, the category has always been, and before this war has always been my opinion, you really did not want to mess with those Ukrainian girls. It was always known, do not mess with the Yukis. Yeah. We called them Yukis. Don't mess with the Yukis. They will cut you. You don't want to get near them in the lunchroom. I think he wants to say something. So but the point is that what your father, Matvey's father, witnessed is kind of like extreme Holocaust in a way, and then what I witnessed with you and your Nina in high school, and this kind of tradition that kind of keeps on going, and now what's happening. Yeah. There's a way in which the Ukrainian people are so fierce. This is what people are so inspired by.
Mm-hmm. Let me just, Lisa, I'll throw that in because it's something, and Victor, I know you want to say something. There's a difference between we had this discussion of economic immigration and displaced person immigrants. Mm-hmm. And anybody during the two world wars, anybody that came before the Soviet Union collapsed really was more of a displaced person, somebody trying to hold on to their culture for those reasons. My wife is from Pittsburgh, from a Pittsburgh family. Warholic is her not maiden name, but her father's mother's name, and they're related to Andy Warhol, who also came during the 1870s. And so we met dancing because dance was just one of these things that you can do and not be totally committed to the culture. It just feels good. It feels like it's something of your own. So I just wanted to say how we knew that arts and culture is one of the things that you can do as a passive aggressive way of holding on to a culture. And it's nothing. You don't have to cut anybody for that. You just have to preserve it, and it gets under somebody else's skin, like Putin's, because it doesn't fit a false narrative, as Matvey put it. So,
but I think the fact that there was a sense of preservation of something that's been so cut, yes. But it just stays, and it's so fierce, and it just keeps coming back. And I look out my window here in the East Village. We live in an area called the Little Ukraine in the East Village. And I see a flag out the window, and it's just like, if I had a place to put a flag, I would, even though I'm not Ukrainian. But it's just like, there is this way in which people are really inspired by the Ukrainian people. There's a part of everyone that really, there is that like underdog and, and a way of seeing, I think it is this kind of what Victor, the numbers of people that have been killed there over and over and over again. And it's not just Ukraine, it's like in other parts of the world too. And it just is, but Victor, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I just want to add something about toughness of Ukrainian people. There is a young woman who helped me here around the house, and she was this morning, and I told her that I will participate in this Zoom discussion, and she sent me a picture about, and on this picture is nine patsani, she said, 9 Ukrainian boys in her native city of Kherson, which is occupied by Russian. But these 9 people still fighting Russian, being in Kherson underground. And they only think that they ask, she said, tell him that they're asking for vest, for, this
Vests.
vest, yeah.
The bulletproof vests.
Yeah, for vest. So, and she sent me the second photograph with faces just blackened, because they are in Kherson fighting Russian in underground in occupied city of Kherson. This is one thing I wanted to add, and the second is to add to this historical excursus. They say that the main reason that Germany became regular democratic country is that Germany was defeated.
Mm-hmm.
Germany was defeated, and when American occupied the country, they were carrying, they making German carrying debt from a concentration camp. So, and then finally German Chancellor Braun sat on his knee and asked forgiveness in Warsaw. So I think that thinking of Russia and Russian people, and I know that a lot of them that I love and yeah, they are good. So the only thing for Russian to become a normal country is to be defeated, and now they have a chance. They have big chance to be defeated and became regular normal country. This is what I want to say.
Victor, you're so right. You're so right about this. For one thing, echoing early on about Matvey remark about, the president origin is in Soviet Jew. In fact, it's really not that different, when you think about Catherine the Great, Matvey. She's born Poland. I mean, how the hell she came to Russia and managed to overturn her husband, Peter III, is remarkable. So that's not something we have.
She strangled him. There's a rather lovely tradition in Russia of strangling your czar. So here comes Poland, about 3 of them got strangled. So if you go a little too crazy, the palace guard collaborating with your wife will somehow dispose of you. By the way, the official claim of what he died of, her husband, was hemorrhoids. I don't know how one dies of hemorrhoids, but that was the official explanation of why he suddenly died.
Absolutely, but
so maybe hemorrhoids is what we'll get to.
Victor's right to say that Russia never felt defeated. Germany did, simply because when you think about the death, Russians have the highest death during the war, 24 million as compared to 400-something thousand American. That's nothing. So in their mind, they won the war. And I think I just want to put this out there because I have another question here. I would love to throw it to Taras here, because when you think about the Cold War ended in December, late December 1991, the US invaded Baghdad, bombed Baghdad in January the following year. That's something really upset Russia. That was.
No, I think. What do you mean? No, they invaded Baghdad much later.
Yeah, I mean, basically in the same, after 2001, I mean 2011, you know?
Yeah.
2001, after September 11, that's what I meant. But I'm just saying that the reason for it, because when the Cold War ended, the Warsaw Pact disappeared. So you're right, Victor. Absolutely, they never felt they were defeated, ever. But I want to throw this in because Tara saying earlier about, you know, being, you know, the whole homophobia, you know, the whole, I mean, it happened in this country too, Lisa. You guys remember the Culture War? You know, it happened here too. I mean, I know when the NAA were created in '64, part of, you know, Linda LBJ Great Society program, it was created. We have struggled so much to maintain that artistic freedom. I mean, I think Mapplethorpe Show was the one that really dictated that whole anti-homophobia, you know. So we have it here too, not the same extent in Russia. But I think this is a good place to close so we can get back to Carolyn. I'm sure we have more people might want to ask questions. By the way, Victor, that was your girlfriend who called it. Matvey told me you have many. So I'm very, very pleased about that.
That's one of his many Ukrainian girlfriends, yes.
With gas. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Lisa, being my co-host, Matvey, Taras, Victor, for your wonderful remark. Let's give it back to Carolyn so we can have a Q&A.
Thank you all. I'd love to turn it to GE first, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for this wonderful witness today of all these testimonies, and for Victor especially. That was just getting this documented is wonderful. The question is maybe very, very general one in a way, and because it bothers me, because I think there as here, and the question is, in keeping silent about evil, in burying it so deep where no marker, you know, shows where it's buried, you kind of talked about earlier, isn't it then being implanted? And won't it then rise up again a millionfold in the future? It seems to have here and it seems to have there.
I absolutely agree. And I think we discussed how, you know, as a white person growing up in the 60s, I knew all the code words to racism. I know them all. I knew them when we heard them here. They were quietly said until they were said loudly. It was coming. It was like for me, and I think for many people that are sensitive to it, it's like a freight train. How did nobody see it? Again, I go back to Nina Khrushchev's piece that, you know, she knew Vladimir Putin. She knew he had these feelings, but I didn't think it was going to get this bad. Really? It's a runaway train.
Victor's friend Alexander Solzhenitsyn famously said, when he was asked about evil, I don't know if you know this quote, Victor, very well. He was asked how to rid the world of evil, and he said, if it was only so easy to cut it, if you could cut it out of your own heart, it exists in everyone's heart. You can't cut it out. It's part of it's part of every human being. It's part of us. And that is the problem. And I found that very wise, like the possibilities of taking it away from the human race is impossible. In other words, because it's in each of us. It will be chasing it. It's sort of like the exterminator. You can try to stomp it out. Obviously, we have to take care of the big bullies before they wipe out, you know.
Yeah. I think in GE's point right here is exactly that. As artists, we shouldn't be throwing out or cutting it out. I think as artists, we sometimes dive into it. Even I do it in this way of learning about folk traditions and seeing how they apply to modern times. As artists, if we want to paint something beautiful or lovely, we have to look and study the opposite oftentimes, and we will only know as much beauty as we know hatred and ugliness and all of that. So there is no way to cut it out, but to study it, was Matvey's point, to study it, analyze it deeply, and then avoid it.
I also thought there was perhaps some people who are artists that might have a question about how do artists make art, or how does Matvey, for example, make art? How does he deal with this right now? Like, how does he go to a studio while something like this is going on, or how does this affect his work? And he answered me like this. He said,
"Yeah, well, I feel like every one of the Fong's Zoom things should properly end with a poem, but also Fong should tell a joke. So I'll answer that with the Russian joke, or it's a Soviet joke, and it's about the rabbit committing some kind of horrible crime, and he's put on trial of the forest animals. And this is, of course, a Russian forest. They give him a choice that if he tells them a joke that is so funny that every one of them will laugh, he will be set free. But if one of them does not laugh, he will be put to death. So he tells this joke, and everybody just cracks up, except for the giraffe.
The giraffe lives in the forest?
The giraffe lives in the, yeah, it can happen, you know. So the giraffe,
a surreal
yeah, it's a surreal. So the giraffe does not laugh. The giraffe just is stone-faced. So, you know, so the rabbit is put to death. And a month afterwards, the giraffe starts cracking up. And so everybody says, well, what are you laughing about? And he says, rabbit told a really funny joke. So I said, you know, I don't know. Do I need to spell out? It's just, I think art is very slow. And by the time, like, you know, it reaches the you know, that's the point of it. It's not the role of art to be didactic or you know, like Vladimir Putin. I'm obviously an amateur historian here and like to generalize, but that's not my role. I don't feel it trickles in indirectly. It's I don't know, maybe eventually it will change, but there's, as far as I'm concerned, there's very little good political art. You know, it took Gerhard Richter 10 years after the fact to paint the great Baader-Meinhof paintings, but it took him, you know, he didn't want to do it right away. It's sort of, it's easy for it to be shallow, sensationalist, or so yeah. I mean, I sometimes feel that lack of politics is politics in one's work.
Absolutely, but just because you painted white square like Lewyckyj, or someone else would be the opposite, paint historical picture, it doesn't really quite reveal the kind of inner freedom of an artist who exercise the autonomy of a freedom as a human being. That is the ultimate test.
Yeah.
Everyone, not just the artist. But, you know, I remember it has a role. You're absolutely right. We all write about this. Victor can testify to this too, and Taras and Lisa and whoever in our audience here, among artists. We see Katya Santabanya's painting away while listening. That's the freedom of her exercise. I think it's just terrific. No, but
I'm just jealous because I cannot multitask like her.
No, but Tara.
And it looks like it's cold in her studio. Somebody get her some heat.
She's upstate, Lisa.
Okay.
She's upstate.
So
Carolyn, can we have one more maybe?
Sure. Yes. Let's see. Can we Susan?
This guy Igor was like raising his hand and waving and.
Oh, I know. We have so many. We've gotten
unless
so many
it was
questions.
a question. Unless it was one of those questions I said I didn't want to answer.
No. Yeah, we've been getting privately a lot of questions, and there's a lot of comments to definitely check out in the chat that are very important for this.
Yeah, I said I wouldn't like reveal certain things about my location.
Oh, okay.
Secret location.
Yeah, is Susan Halper still with us? She came in next. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question, I'm not sure. Are you still here?
Oh, I think Susan has left.
Okay. So then turn to Richard is next. Richard Jacobs.
Bro, unmute yourself, bro.
Hey guys. First of all, I just want to say my love and great respect for Victor, Matvey's dad. He's such an inspiration to me literally every day of my life. I love this man. Mike, I really was wondering if you guys could elaborate a little bit more. Matvey, you threw out the sentence where you said the U.S. is calling and Russia doesn't pick up. And then and I know that you guys are ambivalent about like calling your Russian friends and or who's left there and saying, what the fuck? I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of went on.
Yeah.
You're stringing together a whole bunch of
No. He's no. I understand. I understand the logic there. Yeah. I'm following it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Matvey, like, I know you guys don't have a lot of time, but really, like, that thought of what is keeping you guys from really, trying to push these people to understand what the hell is going on in their country? What is the fear about calling them? Yes.
Tell them also about that service you can call a Russian.
Yeah, there's actually, I think it's coming out of Lithuania. If you're a Russian speaker, they randomly generate a number which is listed, and you can call a Russian speaker and basically try to talk to them. I actually would rather do that. I mean, to tell you the truth, because you love these people. And
it was like during the Trump thing, like my dad was like really into Trump, and like I regret now that he passed away over the summer. I regret all the time I fought with him. You don't want to fight with people all the time, because it's like in the end, it's like you're not going to really change their mind. And if you love them, it's like in the end, it's like you end up just like cursing at each other and fighting, and it's just like
the information is all there. I mean, there's this whole thing. I mean, Putin does have a huge support still, and the war is hugely supported. And they say, well, they're watching this awful Russian television. By the way, some immigrants here do too, and like, well, my dad told me, I mean, and actually support the war. I mean, these are people, Russians living in America, because they watch the television. But they do have access to the information. Other people, you read these articles about their Ukrainian children or relatives, and they just don't want to believe it. It's sort of, it goes back to this German thing where they said, well, we didn't know. But did you want to know? Mm-hmm. You did not want to know. They don't want to know. And I don't know how. I'll tell you. All right. We're talking about the depressing Russia. There's another Russia where nothing like what Ukrainians are suffering or doing, but still, so 15,000 got arrested demonstrating, right? That has to be acknowledged. In 1968, when the Warsaw Pact, but basically Soviet Union, invaded Czechoslovakia, 7 or 8 people demonstrated against the invasion on the Red Square. One of them was a pregnant woman, and they were sent away to the camps for untold amount of years. The rest of the country was silent. Now, there are 15,000 people, still counting, that are still protesting. 200,000, I read it somewhere, simply dropped everything and left. 200,000 people. These are not people that are themselves are getting bombed. Mm-hmm. I've never heard of anything in any place where 200,000 people drop everything and go. Mm-hmm. I don't know of any example. I mean, this is usually happens when you yourself are getting bombed or exterminated. So it's a different place than the place that I grew up in. People are less afraid. Mm-hmm. There is still, I mean, he's trying to stamp it out, but he's also much less powerful, and people are less afraid. Another, I think, is to me is a very hopeful, potentially at least, situation. What about all these conscripts that were lied to and sent into this battle? What are they gonna, when they come back? I mean, the only way to actually stop this is to kill as many of them as possible. It's a terrible thought, but that's the only way forward, actually. But the ones that survive are going to come back. And that may be answering Richard's question. They're going to tell their family what they saw. That's going to be a huge thing. I mean, it happened in Afghanistan. It happened. That's really a ticking bomb there.
Yeah, and they're literally fighting kinfolk. It's like, going from into Canada. It's like, it's so crazy. It must be so hard for these guys.
Yeah,
well, it's a bigger subject, really. I mean, we won't have time to go into it.
No.
The whole idea of liberal hegemony, which is something that they felt the U.S. foreign policy failed to remember. John F. Kennedy policy of containment was the best thing ever happened. But that's another big question.
I want to say something. And I want to about Taras before we go off camera, because something that's so admirable about him that he will never admit to, and you're going to probably smack me around a little bit, Taras, and it's okay. But I actually think that one of the most decent things I've ever heard of a human being doing is something that Taras told me privately, that he doesn't it's not a public service that he does, but after Chernobyl, Taras has been successful in several different businesses and kind of like just whatever, but he doesn't really, take much interest in those successes. It's like makes money and moves on and does, humanitarian things and sort of privately. But one of the things that he told me he did in the time that I saw him, like maybe 10, 15 years ago or something, is that he brings people from Chernobyl who need a limb and individually flies them and picks them up at the Philadelphia airport and brings them to Children's Hospital, CHOPS or somewhere, and has them fitted and pays for the entire thing. And we went to Tyler School of Art and Temple University, and they constantly give me these stupid awards because I'm like an artist who they say they want to parade me around the stupid school. And I'm like, why are you not giving Taras Levitsky the award? He's the superstar of this school. But these stupid schools, they just want what will give you money.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm in the New York Times as an artist, and I'm just like, you guys are idiots. I'm sorry, this is stupid. And I hope this gets to them, because you are incredible hero and humanitarian to us. And I really just wanted it to go out there, because you really don't take any credit for this.
It's not, if that it's not the reason that we do it, and you do a lot also.
Of course, and I knew you were going to say that, but it's like, I've never heard of anyone do anything like this. And I don't know if you're still doing it or if it's even possible because of the war. Mm-hmm. But it's like, this is an act that I was literally floored by and think about. And
yeah. Well, I'll leave you though, because it's not me. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for American doctors that take time off, and we fly them there, and they treat 15 to 20 to 30 children in 1 month. These are Americans, and when we say we have money, we'll pay your way, they say we don't need to. And they take their time off, their vacation time, go there and teach other doctors how to salvage limbs and things like that. This is America.
I know that
America doesn't take credit
but
for.
I know that you're also involved, and you're paying a lot of money to fly them and to do things, and you're not taking credit for it. So I'm just saying that I just wanted to put that out there, and you're being
another thing is you wisely chose to focus on your artistic projects, and they are fascinating, and sort of the combination of you and Mark Morris and those Ukrainians was it's just sort of really like just the vision of a future. It's both tradition but then also forward looking, and it's great. But you were telling us, Lisa and I, how, you've been going there a lot, and you were filming at Maidan, and there's this incredible story you told me, hopefully it's okay to say, is how you brought this New York Jewish cameraman to film the project, and then the shooting started, and you said to him, "This is not your fight, but I'm going to go and film it." And she said, "No, I'm there with you." And you guys were at some point hiding behind a tree, right? And the sniper started shooting, and so the people that were further away from the tree started falling, getting shot.
And they had
and just the kind of stuff. I guess what I'm saying. And then you've been going to Donbass all these years and stuff. But the kind of stuff that you've witnessed firsthand and filmed, and I don't know. I just really feel like that in itself, you're basically a war correspondent there almost, and that should be somehow utilized, because what you've seen is sort of what my dad was saying about, the swollen corpses of starving Ukrainian peasants in the lobby of his building, and these things that you witness have to be sort of documented and not lost,
But,
except Matvey, I know I'm not a correspondent, though. I don't have the heart of the correspondent. I have the heart of that artist that works, like you said, very well, slowly. This stuff is done, and it's actually more from the point of view of, which I love to listen to your father talk about it, the heart of the Ukrainian people. You see them fighting. Lisa said it very well, because we've done this. This isn't the first time. We've done it many times. I think I told you the story of, I'm actually researching this guy, Pilip Orlik, that wrote a first constitution of Ukraine in 1720. He was a good friend, but he was thrown out. Pilip Orlik was thrown out, lived in exile, was good friends with Voltaire. Benjamin Franklin really was a big fan of Voltaire, really wanted to go visit him, and came home with this idea of a constitution with 3 branches of government and a people, all of this stuff that was written by Pilip Orlik was brought back here. It is the heart of Ukrainians, is to be pluralistic and representative of people. We've done this since the day we were there. And the fight that you're seeing is a fight against that. Zelensky says it very well. You Jewish people really know how to speak, I'll tell you. He says it so well that this is a fight of democracy against tyranny. It really is that. And this is the existential threat.
Well, I mean, but also, what I would say, there's a choice involved, as you're well aware, and the audience is aware. Ukrainians also had their own dark moments of their own history. So there are different strands of Ukrainians that are not so nice.
Right.
Right. I mean,
every society has their racist things.
Right. I mean, Bogdan Khmelnytsky, was not exactly kind to Jews or Poles. I mean, he exterminated like a huge amount of them.
Right.
So, and that's sort of the beginning, kind of the birth. So Ukrainian tradition, like the Russian tradition, is full of, or like any tradition, American tradition is full of dark moments. It's more what you choose to emphasize. So, the Putin and all the Russians supporting the war shows this really tribal path of blood and soil and all that, while Ukrainians, they elected a Jewish president by overwhelming number, right? I think his defense minister is also Jewish, right? Or his prime minister is Jewish.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many Afghanis are there. Like, I don't even know where they came from, but it is Russian society is multicultural and so is Ukrainian, but what do you choose to focus on?
Correct. And that's why sometimes it really was poignant when somebody here during our dark years, and I'll say it, during the last president, when you hear, this is not who we are. Come on, guys, this is not who we are. No, this is who we are. It is that dark part that you can't cut out of your heart. but who do we want to be? And,
right.
and that's it, the aspirational moment. We know that this exists, the potential for racism and other kind of things.
Well, as I want to just say, I'm sure we have to go, and Caroline's being probably getting nervous about our wrapping, but I just wanted to say that I'm so glad that, as I was saying, that during the time when all of this stuff was going on in the past 6 years, that you were post-filming that terrible moment in Maidan and the shooting, and you weren't picking up the phone or answering my texts a couple of weeks ago when you did pick up the phone. And then I asked Phong if I could bring you to the Rail community, because I really did want people in, this in some way to be able to hear you, because I think you're really an extraordinary person. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Taras. Thank you, Lisa. Echoing Lisa also. Yeah, I mean, a state of war only serves as an excuse for those domestic tyranny. That's chauvinism. It's super true, and as my mentor, my superior, the Lutheran Jew, came here when he was 3 years old, always say that art unifies mankind, never politics. So that's it, you guys. That's what we do. We bring our friends together to the creation of a work of art. Yes, back to you, Carolyn.
All right, thank you all so much. I just don't want to leave without our final poetry reading that we'll be getting from Neeli Cherkovski today. So please don't leave just yet. Neeli Cherkovski is the author of many books of poetry, including Animal, From the Canyon Outward, and The Crow and I. His papers are held at the Bancroft Library, University of California. Cherkovski received the 2017 Jack Mueller Poetry Prize, and we're so honored to have you here. Neeli, please take it away. Here, you just have to unmute. I'll ask. There you go.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Let me just say I'm overwhelmed. I just, Mark Morris, one of my heroes, and all of you, just so incredible. And Victor, 99. When I was 21, I met a poet in LA who was 92, and he was born in Moscow in 1878. And we would go to dinner together. He would pick me up in his car, and Archie Rosenhaus, he was a retired dentist. And he would tell me he had left Russia after the 2004 revolution. And, but he had been very involved all his life. And then my grandparents, as you'll see in the poem, my grandparents, all four, came from the Ukraine, from Odessa and from around Kiev. And my grandmother, who you'll hear in this poem, would tell me, "Mein father owned a mill." Mine, M-E-I-N, because she spoke Yiddish. She spoke High Russian, which I found out at my nephew's bar mitzvah. She was speaking in Russian to a recent immigrant from Leningrad, a man in his 60s. She was in her 90s. And he started crying. And he went off in a corner. I said, "Why are you crying?" "Because your grandmother is speaking the Russian I haven't heard from but a few people. It's Tsarist high gymnasium Russian." I mean, it was quite amazing to me. So the next day I bought her War and Peace, and the next day I went and got War and Peace in Russian, and she started reading the first page to me. I mean, it was quite amazing. So I have this connection. So Solzhenitsyn said something I agree with so much, and he's talking that the evil inside of us, that what's inside of us, that there's good and there's evil. That's my opinion. I also have to say before I read this, I don't believe in nation states per se. I'm a Jew. I'm an American Jew. I'm a gay man. I'm a California-born guy. I'm a third-generation American. The first poem I wrote was about Mohandas Gandhi. The second poem I ever wrote was about the Buddha in Kamakura, Japan. The third poem I wrote was about Africa and the coming of civilization. So what does that tell me? I was writing about the world. I'm a person of the world. Russia is invading the Ukraine, but Russia is invading Europe. Russia is invading the world. And that's what it's about. So what Solzhenitsyn said about the evil that comes out of us, I had this terrible thought before I wrote this poem. I said, Putin is not an aberration. He's my worst nightmare. My nightmare. What are the possibilities for me to inflict harm on others? I mean, all of that, I think we have to consider all of that. I've heard a lot of Russian sentiment the last few weeks. I know in the Russian area of San Francisco, there's been some incidents. Right now, it's just name calling and all that. It's like anti-Asian stuff that happens and all that, So I also don't believe that I have a real problem with what you would call proletarian political art. I don't necessarily believe in it. I didn't write this as an occasional poem. I call it For the Ukraine. I do want to show, I got a video to show. This is my great grandfather, whose name was Isaac Rothkovich, who had a mill outside. Can you see that?
Yeah. Yes.
That was up in my grandmother's house. The nose job was done there and this is Rachel, his wife. This is all I have. All I have. And but I sat down. I don't write with my fingers. I write with my voice. I speak my writing into voice recognition, and it allows me a fluidity and a spontaneity that I can't get from the writing, and it saves me from arthritis. And so I sat down. I didn't know what I was going to write. I really had no idea. This is as written. And then after I wrote it, let me say this, I put it on Facebook and I said to myself, I'd love to see this in Russian and in Ukrainian. 45 minutes later, I get a communique from Facebook from Moscow, from a well-known translator in Moscow who said he's translating the poem. The next day, the poem came in Russian. I mean, that to me was just quite incredible. For Ukraine, simple enough not to say anything. Let it slide and walk on almond trees, swaying in afternoon wind of our schoolyard. All the time I thought of the war in which there will be no victory, only silence. Only a spare tire left roadside, one last man singing Waltzing Matilda on a beach in Australia I'd seen in a movie when I was a kid. Then we had many wars around the world as I sat at lakeside or hiked into the wilderness. I'd sit in college classrooms wanting to say something, nothing to be said. Man is a fallen leaf. Russian troops advance through the field, punishing the world and making of peace a tattered veil. I should have said something, but I loved the view from the bluff at Fort Funston, cawing of seabirds like airplanes over scrub oak. I wanted to say something when I was a kid studying for bar mitzvah, but the rabbi commented, "Suffer in silence, let the nightmare remain." Now Russian missiles soar into bread lines and over heads of refugees. I'll keep silent to myself, walk the hall of our synagogue, 1957, 12 years after Hiroshima. Is there wheat in the fields even yet? Let us blossom like roses. May we be so young. I see Russian troops making their move. I watch as people flee burning embers. I should have been alive before. That had never been possible. Men tried but failed. Desire huddles in branches of trees. I stare out of the classroom window at the atomic age, listening to talks of nuclear deterrence. I knew we were going to punish ourselves. If I had spoken, there would be no breadlines. If I had stood my ground, Ukrainian earth would rise with the sun. My grandmothers and grandfathers would have spoken of the land and its beauty. Mein father owned a mill, Granny said, near Kiev. She died and the world died. Birds wore cloth woven of wheat. That was the end until all spun out of control. This is how I see it. Thousands of years into the future. Bare bones, rapid fire distortion, out and out lies. China, Russia, America, Prague, Budapest, Beijing, Rio, Tokyo. Do you make a paper crane out of madness and lay it before the shrine? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neeli, for closing us out with that.
Let me just add just one last thing I forgot to say to you. Let me just a second. I remember 1957, 58, 59, Bertrand Russell following the lead of Einstein talking about nuclear deterrence. I have that in the poem. And the microphones were always turned off on him in London, you know. The authorities kept on turned off the microphone. How right he was. What a great prophet he was, because we are so close. And like Solzhenitsyn, and like I said about Putin's indictment, we're doing it. All of us. It isn't just Putin. We're all doing it. And maybe the Mahatma inside of us, because there's always that too. There's the Putin-like guy and there's the Mahatma-like guy, you know, and maybe they'll come together and somehow merge and something good will come out of it. That's all. So thank you again. Thank you all.
Thank you, Neeli. And thank you to our hosts, of course, Phong, Lisa. Thank you to Taras and Matvey. Thanks everyone for commenting in the chat. There's a lot of activity going on there that we do hope everyone gets a chance to look at. And please join us tomorrow for an event at 1 p.m. And as you leave, feel free to turn off your or turn on your microphones and say goodbye as you go.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank
Love you guys.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Goodbye, Victor. Goodbye,
Thank you, Taras.
Thank you. Thank you, Taras.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Taras.
Taras, we got to get together.
We will. We will.
Thank
Some
you.
Ukrainian vodka.
Thank you. Victor, you are the star.
What's that?
You are the star.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Lisa,
Victor.
thank you. Matt, thank you very much.
Oh, and everybody, Victor's going to be on The Moth in April, telling his story on Broadway.
Yes.
You don't want to Betty White him, but you know we're planning on it.
Hey, Lisa, can you send that so we can?
He turns 100 in July. You want to have him on the rail in July, just for his 100th birthday?
Yeah.
Yes.
Victor can hold court in July, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome.
He's going to come to New York.
Yeah, but no, April 25th 5th, he's going to be doing Moth Live, and then obviously it will be recorded and we'll probably.
If you don't know what the Moth podcast is, you know, you should, because it's a lot of fun. It's the next best thing to the Brooklyn Rail.
It's great.
Okay.
Want to tune it
Over
off.
and out.
Bye, you guys. Thank you, Neeli.
Thank you.
Love
Thank
you,
you,
Victor.
Caroline.
Love you all.
Neeli, yay. Paul,
Thank you,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Hey, hey, you
you all.
guys.
All right, bye-bye.
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 Bye, Victor.